She came searching for a fresh start. What she found was a woman who lived like a storm and loved like the sun. Two strangers, separated by glass and circumstance, collided in a city of rain, and what grew between them was more than attraction. It was healing. It was fire. It was home. And together, they learned that love is not about never breaking. It's about choosing to rebuild, again and again, side by side. Don't forget to subscribe if you'd like more lesbian love stories that celebrate connection, healing, and romance. The architect of my heart. The rain in Portland was a different creature altogether. It wasn't the frantic, angry downpours of the East Coast. It was a soft, persistent sigh, a mist that clung to everything and turned the city into a watercolor painting of greys and greens. For Ilara, it was the perfect backdrop to the grey, muted ache in her chest. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her new, too-empty apartment, watching droplets race each other down the glass. Moving across the country was supposed to be a reset, a desperate gamble after the spectacular implosion of her life in Boston. A new job as a lead architect on a high-profile library project, a new city, a new chance to remember who she was when she wasn't half of a crumbling whole. The apartment was a testament to her current state. Sleek, modern, minimalist, and utterly soulless. Boxes were stacked in neat, labeled towers, but she lacked the energy to unpack the memories they held. Her only companion was the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic patter of the rain. A flash of movement in the building across the shared courtyard caught her eye. It was a woman, dancing. Or rather, moving with a raw, uninhibited grace that was more compelling than any choreography. She was in a studio apartment, one wall entirely mirrored, the others adorned with large, vibrant, abstract canvases. The woman's eyes were closed, her head thrown back, her body swaying and dipping to a beat Ilara couldn't hear. She wore paint-stained sweatpants and a black sports bra, her skin gleaming with a fine sheen of sweat. Ilara's breath caught. There was something so fiercely present about her, so entirely consumed by the moment. Her hair was a wild mane of dark curls, her arms sinewy and strong. She moved like a storm contained in human form, powerful, beautiful, and untamable. Ilara felt a pull, a magnetic fascination that was the first real feeling she'd had in months that wasn't grief or numbness. She watched, transfixed, until the woman suddenly stopped, opened her eyes, and looked directly out her window, across the courtyard, and straight at Ilara. Ilara jumped back as if scalded, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pressed herself against the wall, cheeks burning with a ridiculous flush of embarrassment. God, she must think I'm a total creep. She didn't dare look back for the rest of the evening. The image of the dancing woman burned into her mind. The next morning, the rain had eased into a damp chill. Ilara, armed with a blueprint tube and a determined expression she didn't quite feel, walked into the local artisan coffee shop, the Grinding Bean, a stone's throw from her building. It was everything a Portland coffee shop should be. Exposed brick, the rich, bitter scent of expertly roasted beans, and the gentle hiss of an espresso machine. She placed her order for a double macchiato and was fumbling in her bag for her wallet when a smooth, warm voice behind her said, "I've got it." Ilara turned. And there she was. The dancer. Up close, she was even more striking. Her dark eyes were flecked with gold and seemed to miss nothing. A small silver ring pierced her eyebrow, and a tattoo of a delicate line of birds in flight traveled from her wrist up her forearm, disappearing under the sleeve of her worn leather jacket. She smelled of turpentine, fresh coffee, and rain. "Oh, no, please, you don't have to," Ilara stammered, her professional composure utterly deserting her. "I know," the woman said with an easy smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "But it's a Portland welcome. Consider it mandatory." She handed a card to the barista. "Add her macchiato to mine, Sage." The barista, a young person with vibrant blue hair, nodded. "You got it, Ivy." Ivy. The name suited her. Wild, resilient, and likely to climb all over you if you let her. "Ivy," Ilara repeated, the name feeling foreign and lovely on her tongue. "I'm Ilara. And thank you. That's very kind." "Ilara," Ivy said, as if tasting the word. A beautiful name for a beautiful woman who enjoys a midnight show. Ilara's face flamed anew. "I am so sorry about that. I wasn't. I didn't mean to spy. I just moved in and I was staring into space, really. Ivy laughed, a rich, unfettered sound that drew a few glances from other patrons. Don't apologize. It's nice to have an appreciative audience. Even a shy one who hides behind walls. She picked up her own drink, a terrifyingly large black coffee, and Ilara's macchiato, handing it to her. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and a jolt, sharp and electric, shot up Ilara's arm. Ivy's eyes flickered down to their hands and then back to Ilara's face, her expression shifting into something more curious, more intense. So, you're the new neighbor in 4B, Ivy stated. I was wondering who'd finally taken that sterile little box. It is a bit sterile, Ilara admitted, surprised by her own honesty. Needs some life. Some art. Some mess. Ivy grinned. I'm across the way in 3C. The messy one. You can't miss it. I've noticed, Ilara said, then immediately wished she could swallow the words. Ivy's grin widened. I know. She took a sip of her coffee. Architect. Ilara blinked. How did you know? The blueprints. The sensible yet stylish shoes. The way you're visually measuring the doorframe right now. It's either that or you're a very particular kind of spy. Ilara found herself laughing, a real, genuine laugh that felt strange and wonderful. Guilty. I'm starting on the new Hadley Library project downtown. Ivy whistled, impressed. The Zaha Hadid-esque marvel. I've seen the renderings. It's stunning. So you're not just an architect, you're a capital A architect. I try to be. And you're an artist. It wasn't a question. I try to be, Ivy echoed, her tone playful. Painter. Mostly. I teach a few classes at PNCA, too. Keep the dream alive and the ramen noodles flowing. They stood there for a moment, in the warm, noisy space, a bubble of unexpected connection forming around them. Ilara felt the heavy blanket of her grief lift, just for a second, allowing a sliver of light and warmth to penetrate. Well, Ilara the architect, Ivy said softly, her dark eyes holding Ilara's. Welcome to the neighborhood. I have a feeling it just got a lot more interesting. And with a final, devastating smile, she turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving Ilara standing there, her macchiato cooling in her hand, her entire world tilting on its axis. The project was demanding, a baptism by fire into her new firm. Days were spent in meetings, on site with hard hats and safety vests, hunched over drafting tables and glowing screens. But every evening, as she returned home, her eyes would instinctively drift to the windows of 3C. Sometimes Ivy would be there, a brush in her hand, attacking a large canvas with passionate strokes, her brow furrowed in concentration. Other times, she'd be laughing with a group of people, a bottle of wine in hand, the room filled with music and the easy chaos of creative people. And sometimes, she'd be dancing again, lost in her private world. Ilara found herself looking forward to it. It became a ritual, a secret moment of connection. She never waved, and Ivy never explicitly acknowledged her, but sometimes she'd pause, look towards Ilara's window, and offer a small, knowing smile before turning back to her work. A week after their coffee shop meeting, a small, carefully wrapped package was leaning against Ilara's door. There was no note. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a small ceramic mug. It was beautifully, imperfectly hand-thrown, glazed in a deep, oceanic blue with a splash of gold leaf that looked like a captured sunbeam. It was the antithesis of the cold, modern mugs in her cupboard. Ilara held it, her thumb tracing the unique grooves and ridges, a lump forming in her throat. It was the first truly personal thing in her new life. The next morning, she brought the mug to the grinding bean. Ivy was there, arguing good-naturedly with Sage about the merits of a new light roast. Ilara walked up and placed the blue mug on the counter. I'd like my macchiato in this, please. Ivy turned, her eyes dropping to the mug. A slow, beautiful smile spread across her face, reaching her eyes. She didn't say a word, but the look she gave Ilara was worth 1,000 sonnets. It was a look of understanding, of shared secrets, of a beginning. From that day on, they fell into a rhythm. Most mornings, they'd find each other at the coffee shop. Sometimes Ivy would drag Ilara to a gallery opening, introducing her to a world of artists and musicians that was so different from her own structured existence. Ilara, in turn, would explain the principles of form and function behind her designs, and Ivy would listen with genuine fascination, her artist's mind seeing the poetry in the math. Ilara learned that Ivy was a force of nature. She was fiercely loyal, incredibly smart, and unapologetically herself. She felt everything deeply: joy, anger, passion, sorrow, and she expressed it all through her art and her life. She was the color Ilara hadn't realized was missing from her world. And Ilara was falling hard. One Friday evening, Ivy texted her, still at the studio. Critique night ran late. Starving. Come rescue me. I have wine. Ilara's heart did a little flip. She'd never been to Ivy's studio on campus. She typed back, on my way. What kind of wine? The kind that comes in a bottle. Hurry. The PNCA building was mostly empty, the halls echoing with the ghost of the day's creativity. Ilara found Ivy's studio at the end of a long corridor. The door was ajar, and soft music spilled out, something old and bluesy. She pushed the door open and stopped dead. Ivy was there, but she wasn't painting. She was standing on a small dais, and a man Ilara recognized as a sculpture professor was sketching her. Ivy was topless, her back to the door, her head turned slightly over her shoulder. She was bathed in the warm glow of a single spotlight, her skin glowing like honey. The lines of her back, the curve of her waist, the strength in her shoulders. It was the most breathtakingly beautiful thing Ilara had ever seen. It was art and life, vulnerability and power, all contained in one woman. Ivy's eyes met Ilara's in the reflection of the large mirror opposite her. She didn't startle or move to cover herself. She just held Ilara's gaze, her expression unreadable. The professor, Mark, noticed Ilara. Oh, hello. Can I help you? Ivy spoke, her voice low and steady, her eyes still locked on Ilara's. It's okay, Mark. She's with me. The words, simple and declarative, sent a shockwave through Ilara. She's with me. I'm just finishing up, Mark said, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. He made a few final strokes on his pad. And, done. You're a fantastic model, Ivy. Never fidget. Ivy finally broke eye contact with Ilara, reaching for a robe draped over a chair. It's all the dance training. Teaches you how to hold a pose. Thanks, Mark. Mark gathered his things and left with a friendly nod to Ilara, leaving the two women alone in the studio. The air was thick with the smell of clay, oil paint, and something else, something charged and potent. Ivy tied the robe closed, though it did little to diminish the image seared into Ilara's mind. Hey, she said softly. Hey, Ilara breathed, her voice shaky. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. You didn't. Ivy walked towards her, stopping just a foot away. It's just life drawing. It's not a big deal. But it was a big deal. To Ilara, it was everything. It was the final brick in the wall around her heart crumbling to dust. She had tried so hard to be careful, to guard herself, to move slowly. But standing there, seeing Ivy in her most raw and authentic state, she knew it was futile. Ilara. Ivy's voice was laced with concern. Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Ilara shook her head, tears welling in her eyes unexpectedly. No, I think I've just finally seen the sun after a very long winter. Ivy's face softened. She reached out, her fingers gently brushing a tear from Ilara's cheek. The touch was electric, a brand. Ilara. I can't do this halfway, Ivy, Ilara whispered, her heart laid bare. I'm broken. Or I was. You're putting me back together with every smile, every conversation, every stupid, beautiful mug. And I'm terrified because I'm falling in love with you, and I don't know how to do it without completely shattering. Ivy's breath hitched. She cupped Ilara's face in her hands, her thumbs stroking her cheeks. Her eyes searched Ilara's, looking for any hint of doubt, any hesitation. She found only raw, aching truth. Then don't do it halfway, Ivy murmured, her voice husky with emotion. Shatter. I'll be here to help you put the pieces back together. In a new way. A better way. She leaned in slowly, giving Ilara every chance to pull away. Ilara closed the distance. Their first kiss was not gentle. It was a collision. It was months of suppressed longing, of stolen glances, of emotional intimacy finally given physical form. Ivy's lips were soft and demanding, tasting of wine and the faint, metallic hint of her lip ring. Ilara's hands came up to grip Ivy's waist, pulling her closer, feeling the solid, real warmth of her through the silk of the robe. It was heat and need and a profound sense of coming home. Ivy's tongue met hers, and a moan escaped Ilara's throat, a sound she barely recognized as her own. Ivy's hand slid from her face into her hair, till Ivy, Ilara gasped as Ivy's mouth moved to her jaw, her throat, nibbling and sucking at the sensitive skin there. Her hands were everywhere, pulling at Ilara's blouse, untucking it from her trousers. "I need to see you," Ivy breathed against her skin, her fingers working the buttons of the blouse with an urgency that made Ilara's knees weak. "All of you." Ilara helped her, her own fingers fumbling with the buttons of Ivy's jeans. This was a hunger, a desperate need to be as close as humanly possible, to erase any space between them. Clothes fell away in a trail from the door to the bedroom, a path of discarded professionalism and bohemian armor. Ivy's room was a reflection of her, vibrant, chaotic, and beautiful. Canvases leaned against walls, books were stacked precariously on every surface, and the air smelled of her, of paint, sandalwood, and sex. She laid Ilara down on the rumpled sheets, her dark eyes blazing with desire and something deeper, something infinitely tender. She hovered above her, taking her in. "My God, Ilara," she whispered, her voice full of awe. "You are so beautiful." Her touch was reverent then, slowing from its frantic pace. She traced the lines of Ilara's body, the slope of her shoulders, the curve of her hips, the sensitive skin of her inner thighs, as if she were memorizing her by touch alone. Every brush of her fingers, every kiss of her lips, was a brand, a claim, a promise. Ilara, who had felt so closed off for so long, felt herself opening like a flower under the sun. She arched into Ivy's touch, her hands tangling in the wild dark curls, pulling her down for another deep, searching kiss. "I want to taste you," Ivy murmured against her mouth, her hand sliding between Ilara's thighs. "I want to make you come apart for me." Ilara could only nod, her ability for coherent speech gone, replaced by a throbbing, aching need. Ivy's touch was expert, knowing, as if she had always known the map of Ilara's body. Her fingers found her center, slick and hot and ready, and Ilara cried out, a sharp, broken sound. Ivy watched her face, her eyes dark with passion, as she slid 2 fingers inside her. The stretch, the fullness, was exquisite. Ilara's hips bucked off the bed, meeting her thrusts. "That's it," Ivy coaxed, her thumb circling Ilara's clit with a perfect, maddening pressure. "Let go. I've got you." The coil of pleasure tightened deep in Ilara's belly, winding tighter and tighter with every stroke of Ivy's fingers, every whispered endearment. She was babbling, pleading, words she didn't recognize tumbling from her lips. She was flying, tethered to the earth only by Ivy's touch, Ivy's eyes holding hers. The orgasm ripped through her with the force of a hurricane, blinding and total. Wave after wave of pleasure crashed over her, stealing her vision, her breath, her very sense of self. She screamed Ivy's name, her body convulsing around Ivy's fingers, which worked her through the shattering climax until she was a trembling, oversensitive mess. Ivy held her as she came down, gently withdrawing her fingers and kissing her way back up Ilara's body. She kissed her stomach, her ribs, the valley between her breasts, before finally claiming her mouth again, letting Ilara taste herself on her lips. "You," Ilara panted, her body still humming, "ah, incredible." Ivy smiled, a proud, sated smile. "You're not so bad yourself, architect." She nestled beside her, pulling the quilt over them both, and drew Ilara into her arms, spooning her from behind. Ilara felt Ivy's lips on her shoulder, a soft, lingering kiss. "Stay," Ivy whispered into her skin. It wasn't a question. It was a request, a hope. Ilara turned in her arms, facing her. In the dim light filtering in from the courtyard, she could see the gold flecks in Ivy's eyes. She saw the passion, but she also saw the vulnerability, the hope that mirrored her own. "I'm not going anywhere," Ilara promised. And for the first time, she believed it. She wasn't just staying the night. She was staying. She leaned in and kissed Ivy, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of love and a future she had never dared to imagine. Then, fueled by new confidence, by the feel of Ivy's skin against hers, she began to explore. She kissed her way down Ivy's body, learning the landscape of her, the pulse point at her throat, the swell of her breasts, the flat plane of her stomach. She worshipped her with her mouth and hands, relearning what she had only seen from a distance. When she finally tasted her, Ivy's back arched off the bed, a broken cry echoing in the quiet room. Her hands fisted in Ilara's hair, not guiding, just holding on. Ilara loved her with her tongue, learning what made her gasp, what made her moan, what made her chant Ilara's name like a prayer. Ivy's climax was a quiet, intense thing. She trembled violently, her whole body tensing before going completely limp, a single tear tracing a path from the corner of her eye into her hairline. Ilara held her through it, soothing her with gentle touches and whispered words, feeling a possessiveness and a protectiveness so fierce it stole her breath. Later, tangled together in the moonlit dark, their limbs intertwined, Ilara traced the birds on Ivy's arm. "Where are they flying to?" she asked sleepily. Ivy's hand came to cover hers. "Home," she said simply. She turned her head to look at Ilara. "They're flying home." And as Ilara drifted off to sleep, wrapped in the scent and safety of the woman she loved, she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she had finally found hers. The weeks that followed were a golden haze. Ilara's sterile apartment slowly became a home. Ivy's paintings began to appear on her walls. Her books mingled with Ilara's on the shelves. The blue mug had a permanent home on her counter. They built a life. Mornings were for coffee and shared pastries at the grinding bean. Evenings were for cooking together in Ivy's chaotic kitchen, dancing to old records, and making love until the early hours. Ilara laughed more than she had in years. The grey ache in her chest was replaced by a warm, glowing light. Ivy was her muse and her sanctuary. Ilara found her designs becoming more fluid, more inspired, infused with the artistry and passion she was surrounded by at home. She started sketching again, not just buildings, but the curve of Ivy's smile, the way the light caught her curls. It wasn't all perfect. Ilara had nightmares sometimes, echoes of her past life. She would wake up trembling, and Ivy would be there, pulling her close, whispering, "I'm here. You're safe. You're with me." And the demons would recede. One afternoon, they were hiking in Forest Park, the dense canopy of fir and maple filtering the sunlight into a green-gold dapple. They reached a lookout point overlooking the Willamette River, the city spread out before them. Ivy was quiet, unusually pensive. "Penny for your thoughts?" Ilara asked, squeezing her hand. Ivy turned to her, her expression serious. "I love you, Ilara." The words, though felt every day, spoken aloud in the quiet of the forest, stole Ilara's breath. Ivy had never said them before. "I love you so much it terrifies me," Ivy continued, her voice thick. "I've never felt like this. You're it for me. I know it." Tears filled Ilara's eyes. "I love you, too, Ivy. More than I knew was possible." Ivy took a deep breath and reached into her pocket. She pulled out a small, worn velvet box. Ilara's heart stopped. "I'm not proposing," Ivy said quickly, a nervous smile touching her lips. "Not yet, anyway. But I want to give you this. As a promise." She opened the box. Nestled inside was not a ring, but a small, exquisitely crafted silver key on a delicate chain. "It's a key to my studio. And my apartment. And my heart," Ivy said, her eyes glistening. "Where I am is your home. Always. No matter what." Ilara's hand flew to her mouth, a sob catching in her throat. It was the most romantic, most Ivy gesture imaginable. It wasn't about ownership. It was about belonging. It was an invitation into every part of her life. Forever. "Will you wear it?" Ivy asked, her voice barely a whisper. Wordlessly, Ilara turned and lifted her hair. Ivy's fingers were trembling slightly as she fastened the chain around her neck. The key settled against Ilara's chest, cool at first, then warming against her skin. She turned back and touched it, feeling its weight, its significance. "It's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me," she said, her voice choked with emotion. She pulled Ivy into a fierce kiss, pouring all her love, her gratitude, her promise into it. They held each other as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, their future stretching out before them as bright and beautiful as the Portland skyline. The storm came out of nowhere. It was a classic Pacific Northwest autumn gale, whipping the rain into horizontal sheets and howling around the buildings. Ilara was working late at the office, finalizing a presentation for the next day. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ivy. "Power's out in the building. Candles and scary shadows. Hurry home. I miss you." Ilara smiled. "Finishing up now. Be there in 30. Don't let the shadows get you." She sent the message and gathered her things, a warm feeling spreading through her despite the nasty weather. Home. Ivy was home. The drive was slow, the wipers struggling against the torrential rain. As she turned onto their street, her headlights illuminated a scene that made her blood run cold. Fire trucks. Ambulances. Their building. Their courtyard. Her heart leapt into her throat. She slammed the car into park, not even bothering to turn it off properly, and ran towards the chaos, the rain instantly soaking her to the skin. "Ilara." She turned to see Sage, the barista, standing under an awning, their face pale. "Sage. What happened? Is it a fire?" "Lightning," Sage said, their voice shaking. "It hit the roof. It started a small fire, but the bigger problem was the surge. It blew out transformers. There was an explosion of glass." Ilara's world narrowed to a single, terrifying point. "Which apartment?" she demanded, her voice a ragged whisper. Sage just pointed, their expression one of pity and dread. Ilara followed their gaze. The windows of 3C were dark, like all the others. But the entire beautiful, floor-to-ceiling window was gone. A web of fractures radiated from a massive hole in the center, and the opening was covered by a dark top that flapped violently in the wind. Shards of glass, glittering like evil diamonds, were scattered across the courtyard below. "Ivy," Ilara whispered. She broke into a run, pushing past a firefighter who tried to stop her. "My girlfriend. She's in there. Ivy. Ivy." She took the stairs 3 at a time, her breath coming in ragged sobs. The door to 3C was open. Paramedics were inside. Ilara burst through the door. The apartment was a disaster. The storm was raging through the giant, gaping hole where the window had been. Rain was pouring in, soaking the beautiful rugs, the canvases, the furniture. The top snapped and billowed. Glass was everywhere. And in the middle of it all, sitting on the sodden couch, was Ivy. She was wrapped in a shock blanket, a paramedic kneeling in front of her. Her face was ashen, streaked with rain or tears. And her left arm was bandaged heavily from her wrist to her elbow. A dark red stain was already seeping through the white gauze. "Ivy!" Ilara cried, rushing to her and dropping to her knees. Ivy looked up, her eyes wide and shocky. "Ilara," she said, her voice small and lost. "I'm here, baby, I'm here." Ilara took her face in her hands, ignoring the glass crunching under her knees. She looked at the paramedic. "Is she okay? What happened?" "The lightning strike was very close," the paramedic said gently. "The window blew in. She was standing right there. She took the brunt of the glass. The laceration on her arm is deep. She's going to need surgery to repair the damage to the tendons. We need to get her to the hospital now." Tendons. Surgery. Ilara's mind reeled. Ivy was an artist. Her hands were her life. Ivy began to tremble violently. "My arm," she whispered, her eyes filling with a terror far greater than any pain. I can't feel my fingers. Ilara, I can't move my fingers." The bottom dropped out of Ilara's world. She gathered Ivy into her arms, holding her as tightly as she dared, rocking her gently. "Shush, it's going to be okay. We'll fix it. I promise. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." She rode in the ambulance, holding Ivy's uninjured hand, her own heart shattering with every mile. Ivy was silent now, her eyes closed, but the tears kept leaking out, tracing paths through the grime on her cheeks. The hours in the hospital were a blur of waiting, of forms, of sterile smells and hushed voices. Ivy was taken into surgery. Ilara called Ivy's family, her voice surprisingly steady as she explained the situation. Then she sat alone in the waiting room, the key around her neck feeling like a lead weight. She thought of Ivy's hands. The hands that held a paintbrush with such certainty. The hands that danced through the air as she spoke. The hands that touched Ilara with such exquisite tenderness. The hands that had built a home for her heart. What if they couldn't fix them? The thought was a void, a darkness so complete it threatened to swallow her whole. She bent over, her head in her hands, and finally let the tears come. She cried for Ivy's pain, for her fear, for the cruel randomness of the universe. She cried until there were no tears left. The surgeon found her hours later. He looked tired but kind. "Ms. Vance." Ilara shot to her feet. "Yes. How is she?" "The surgery went as well as we could hope," he said. "We repaired the damage to the flexor tendons and the median nerve. It was a significant injury." "Her hand?" Ilara asked, her voice trembling. "It's too early to tell the full extent of the functional recovery," he said carefully. "There will be a long road of physical therapy. A very long road. It's unlikely she will ever regain 100% of the fine motor skills she had before." Unlikely. The word echoed in the hollow space inside her. "But," the surgeon added, seeing her devastation, "with hard work and dedication, a great deal of function can be restored. She's young and healthy. That's on her side. She's in recovery now. You can see her soon." When Ilara was finally allowed into the room, Ivy was asleep, pale against the white pillows, her injured arm resting on a stack of pillows, swathed in a massive bandage and a splint. And 4 dripped fluids and pain medication into her other arm. Ilara pulled a chair close to the bed and took Ivy's right hand, lifting it to her lips. She held it there, praying, begging any force in the universe to let this woman, her woman, be okay. Ivy's eyelids fluttered open. She looked disoriented for a moment, her gaze unfocused, before it landed on Ilara. A weak smile touched her lips. "Hey," she rasped. "Hey, baby," Ilara said, her voice thick with emotion. She gently brushed the curls back from Ivy's forehead. "How do you feel?" "Dopey," Ivy murmured. Her eyes drifted to her bandaged arm, and the fog of medication seemed to clear momentarily, replaced by dawning horror. She tried to move the fingers peeking out from the bandage. Nothing happened. A single, gut-wrenching sob escaped her. "I can't move them, Ilara." "I know, my love, I know," Ilara said, her own tears falling again. "The doctor said it will take time. The nerves need to heal. You have to be patient." "Patient?" Ivy's voice was a broken whisper, filled with a despair that tore at Ilara's soul. "What am I if I can't paint? What am I if I can't create? It's who I am." Ilara leaned forward, her face close to Ivy's. "You listen to me, Ivy Vance. You are not your hands. You are your heart. You are your passion. You are your courage. And you are the most resilient, most beautiful person I have ever known. This," she said, gently touching the bandage, "is a setback. It is not the end. We will get through this. Together. I am not going anywhere. Do you understand me?" Ivy looked at her, the despair in her eyes slowly receding, replaced by a glimmer of the fierce woman Ilara loved. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "I love you," Ilara whispered, kissing her forehead. "Now rest. I'll be right here when you wake up." The days in the hospital were long and difficult. Ivy was in pain, frustrated, and deeply depressed. The physical therapist came and went, putting her through painful, rudimentary exercises. Ivy would try, her face a mask of concentration and agony, and then collapse back against the pillows, exhausted and defeated. Ilara rarely left her side. She slept in the uncomfortable chair, held the basin when Ivy was sick from the medication, advocated for her with the nurses, and read to her when she couldn't sleep. One afternoon, Ivy was particularly despondent. She'd had a painful PT session and had barely spoken for hours. "I want to go home," she said quietly, staring out the window at the grey sky. "We will, soon," Ilara promised. No, Ivy said, her voice hollow. I want to go home and paint. And I never will again. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Ilara stood up. She'd had an idea. It was a risk, but she had to try. She'd called Sage earlier and asked for a favor. I'll be right back, she said. She left the room and returned a few minutes later with a large, flat package wrapped in brown paper. She leaned it against the wall opposite Ivy's bed. What's that? Ivy asked, without much interest. A get-well present, Ilara said. She began to carefully unwrap it. As the paper fell away, Ivy's breath caught in her throat. It was a painting. One of hers. But not one she recognized. It was a portrait. Of Ilara. Ilara was looking slightly off canvas, a soft, private smile on her lips. The light was catching her eyes, making them sparkle. The style was unmistakably Ivy's, bold brushstrokes, vibrant color, full of life and emotion. But it was unfinished. The background was only roughly blocked in. I don't understand, Ivy whispered, her eyes glued to the canvas. I never painted this. You did, Ilara said softly, coming to sit on the edge of the bed. Every morning, when I thought you were just sketching in your coffee shop journal, you were sketching me. You had dozens of them. Sage knew you were working on a larger piece in the back room of the shop, as a surprise for me. They helped me get it after the storm. Tears welled in Ivy's eyes as she looked at the painting. She could see her own hand in every stroke, her own love for this woman poured onto the canvas. It's not finished, Ivy said, her voice cracking. I know, Ilara said, taking her good hand. And it's yours to finish. Whenever you're ready. However you're ready. She paused, letting the words sink in. Your art isn't in your hand, Ivy. It's in here. She placed their joined hands over Ivy's heart. It's in your eyes that see beauty where others don't. It's in your soul. If you never pick up a brush again, you will still be an artist. You will find a way to create because it's who you are. And I will be there, in whatever way you need me, to help you. Ivy looked from the painting to Ilara, and for the first time since the accident, the cloud of despair in her eyes began to truly lift. It was replaced by a dawning, fragile hope. She squeezed Ilara's hand. I love you, she said, the words filled with a new strength. I love you, too. Ivy was discharged a week later. Ilara had spent the time they were apart cleaning her apartment. She'd had a crew come in to board up the broken window properly and clean every last speck of glass. She'd salvaged what she could, drying out books and sketches, carefully moving the wet canvases to her own apartment to dry flat. She'd bought every pillow in Portland to make a nest on the couch for Ivy. When she brought Ivy home, the first thing Ivy saw was her own portrait, hanging on the only wall that wasn't an external wall, safe from the weather. And next to it, on a small table, was a brand new, left-handed drawing tablet and stylus. Ivy didn't say a word. She just walked to the portrait and touched the edge of the canvas with her bandaged hand. Then she turned to Ilara, her eyes shining with unshed tears of gratitude, and pulled her into a tight, one-armed hug. Thank you, she whispered into Ilara's neck. The recovery was, as the doctor predicted, a long and arduous road. There were days of frustration and tears, of pain and setbacks. Ivy had to learn to do everything left-handed. But through it all, Ilara was her rock. Her cheerleader. Her partner. And slowly, painstakingly, Ivy began to reclaim her life. She started with the tablet, her left hand clumsy at first, creating digital drawings that were different from her oil paintings, but still beautiful. She began to teach again, adapting her methods, showing her students that art was not about perfection of form, but about expression of spirit. 6 months after the accident, on a bright spring morning, Ivy stood in front of her portrait of Ilara. Her right arm was out of the splint, though it was still weak, and her fingers could only manage a weak, trembling grip. She picked up a brush. She dipped it in a small dish of phthalo blue, the color of Ilara's eyes. Her hand shook violently. A drop of paint splattered on the floor. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes. She felt Ilara's presence behind her before she heard her. I'm here, Ilara said softly, coming to stand beside her. You can do this. Ivy opened her eyes, looked at the love and unwavering belief in Ilara's face, and turned back to the canvas. She steadied her right hand with her left, and with a concentration that furrowed her brow, she touched the brush to the canvas. She filled in one of the unfinished eyes, a single stroke of color. It wasn't perfect. The line was a little wobbly. But it was a beginning. She lowered the brush, her whole body trembling with the effort and the emotion. Ilara wrapped her arms around her from behind, resting her chin on Ivy's shoulder, looking at the stroke of blue on the canvas. "It's beautiful," Ilara whispered. Ivy leaned back into her embrace, into her strength, into her love. She looked at the key that still hung around Ilara's neck, glinting in the morning sun. She had given Ilara a key to her home. And Ilara, in return, had given her the key to her future. Not a perfect future, but a real one. A resilient one. A future built together, stroke by stubborn, beautiful stroke. "I love you, Ilara," Ivy said, turning in her arms. Ilara smiled, that beautiful, private smile that Ivy had captured on canvas and in her heart. "I love you, too, my artist. Always." And outside, the rain began to fall again, a gentle, life-giving sigh against the windows, washing the world clean, promising new growth, and sealing the love that had been forged in sunshine and tested in storm. They had built something unbreakable. They had built a love story. Conclusion: rebuilding love, stroke by stroke. Months later, Portland was once again dressed in its watercolor grays, the rain soft and steady against the glass. But inside 3C, the room glowed with warmth. The window that once shattered in the storm was whole again, stronger now, reinforced. And in front of it stood Ivy, paintbrush in her still trembling right hand, her left steadying the canvas. The progress was slow, imperfect, but every stroke was a victory. Ilara sat nearby with her sketches, half watching the lines of her new library project take shape and half watching the woman who had become the blueprint of her heart. The once sterile apartment across the courtyard had been abandoned. She lived here now, in Ivy's chaos, in Ivy's light. Their lives had spilled together like colors blending on wet paper, inseparable and vibrant. "You know," Ilara said softly, breaking the companionable silence, "I used to think architecture was about permanence. About making something so strong it could never fall." Ivy glanced at her, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "And now? Now I think it's about designing spaces that can bend, adapt, be rebuilt. Because nothing lasts untouched. Not buildings. Not people. Not even us." She stood and crossed the room, laying a gentle hand over Ivy's paint-splattered one. "But we can always choose to rebuild. Together." Ivy set the brush down, her dark eyes shining as they met Ilara's. "You're the architect of my heart, Ilara. You always will be." The rain outside deepened, but neither woman noticed. They kissed, slow and certain, their love steady as the rhythm of the storm. What had started as two strangers separated by glass had become something unshakable. They had been broken. They had been tested. But together, they had built a home, a life, and a love story strong enough to weather any storm. And in the quiet of that Portland evening, with paint drying on canvas and blueprints curling on the table, Ilara finally understood, love wasn't about never breaking. It was about choosing, again and again, to rebuild, side by side.